All right, and we're recording here. I'll admit everybody in. All right, and here we go. Welcome everybody to a Freethinkers Corner. I'll turn my video on here. The Freethinkers Corner, Books and More, coming live from my house. Welcome to our Frightmare Before Christmas author series. Our next author up joining us is Tony Tremblay from New Hampshire, Goffstown, New Hampshire. He's the author of 3 collections of short stories, which many have been featured in different magazines and publications. He does have 3 books on his own that have these collections in them. His first novel is called The Moore House. All these books can be found on our website and at our store. He also hosted the Taco Society Presents, which featured horror writers from around the area. And he's a founding member of the horror convention NoCon. One thing I wanted to mention before we begin is that if you have any questions or comment, we'll keep everybody muted and your videos off so that there's no confusion. But if you do have a question or comment, please use the chat feature and I will definitely relay your question or comment to Tony. That's the same thing with Facebook Live. Use the comment section there and I'll relay your question. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been a customer of a Freethinkers Corner for at least a year or two. I've enjoyed going there. I've enjoyed our conversations, and I've enjoyed the events that we've had there. So thank you very much for asking me on.
You're welcome. So I haven't had a chance to read your book, The Moore House, although we've had it for quite a while. But my son did read it. Yeah, my son loves it. He said it freaked him out for the longest time. You want to give a quick synopsis on what it's about?
Yeah, The Moore House is it's an exorcism story about a priest and 3 of his assistants who used to be nuns that aren't nuns any longer. But what they do is he has the 3 nuns, ex-nuns, go out to a supposedly haunted house or where some supernatural events are going on. And these 3 nuns all have sort of psychic abilities where they can tell whether the house or the place or the object is haunted or not, or if there's a presence involved. And what he does is he sends these 3 ex-nuns to a place called the Moore House, which is located in Goffstown, New Hampshire. And they do their thing. They sit there and they walk around and they stand and they talk and whatnot. And they come to the conclusion that there's nothing there, that there's no supernatural presence, there's no evil. And the priest is super happy. He says, thank you. He leaves. And just as they're about to leave, one of them notices that the door to the house is an awful cranberry color. And the other 2 kind of look at her and says, what are you talking about? You know, the door's an awful green color. And the third one says, what are you guys talking about? It's the worst looking purple I've ever seen. And they kind of look at each other and they say, whoa, maybe things aren't as innocent or as vacated as we think they are. And from there, the crap hits the fan. It just gets worse and worse and worse.
So what about some of your other collections? There's the Blue Stars.
Blue Stars and other.
I left them all at the store, and I forgot to bring them to hold them up and show. Yeah, there we go.
Blue Stars. This is my second collection, and it contains most of my newer stories, but it also contains some of the first stories I've ever wrote that were published, but not widely. I used to belong to a group called Horror World. And it was a chat place, so a lot of people would gather there, and a lot of professional horror authors would stop by. And what we did is we said, let's have a contest, and all the members of the group would write a story. And then what we did is we asked the authors of, I'm talking about Robert Dunbar, Steve Vernon. So many others. I believe Jim Moore was involved. Tom Piccirilli. There was an awful lot of authors that stopped by, and what they would do is they'd read the story, they'd critique each one of them, and then they'd say which one is the best. Well, I was part of that that group that would submit stories, and there was, I think, 3 or 4 of them that I put in Blue Stars that I really enjoyed writing, and I thought they were really good. That never saw the light of day beyond Horror World, so I put those in the in Blue Stars. I also put the first novella I ever wrote called Steel, which was in a book called Triplicity with Stacey Longo and Rob Smales. And that was, oh gosh, I want to say 110, 120 pages long. And it was a post-apocalyptic story. And that leads it off. That leads Blue Stars off. And from there, there's various other stories that I had published in some pretty nice magazines.
How did you first get involved or get interested in writing horror?
Gosh, I'm a child. I'm not a child, but I'm an adult of the 70s and 80s horror boom. I used to love those books that came out in the 70s and 80s, and I was a big fan before Stephen King started. But King got involved, and then Peter Straub, and I just love that stuff. And then the 80s came, and a whole bunch of other authors came in, and I would read these things like you wouldn't believe. Every time I saw a new one at the store, I would buy it. I just loved horror, and I always thought someday maybe I'll be able to write one of these stories. And so the years passed, and I want to say now it's probably about 15 years ago. I ran into an acquaintance at the local grocery store, and she said, I know you've always wanted to write, but did you know that at the library they have a writers group? And you might want to check them out and see if you can, write a story and see if you can get it published. And I did. I joined the writers group, and they were fantastic. There were a lot of ups and downs, like there is in any writers group. But I learned how to write. I learned the mechanics. You don't jump in and write a story, and it comes out perfect, as anybody will tell you. It's got to be edited. But even before it's edited, before an editor to look at it, it's got to make some sense. It's got to flow. And I was taught basically how to make it flow. Where do you put this? Where do you put that? What do readers look for? What do you need to do to get their attention? So I spent a few years doing that, and finally, I'll never forget it. The day I finally realized that I was a writer is I wrote a story, and I sent it into the writers group, and they looked at it, and they were real quiet when it was my turn for them to critique. And then one of them looked up and said, "Tony, you've done it. You found your voice. You're a writer." And I knew the story was good, but that made me feel so good. It gave me the courage to keep going, and I did. I kept going, and I wrote, and I started to get published professionally, and I'm where I am now.
So I had mentioned that you formed, you're a founding member of NoCon.
Yeah.
And so how did you go about starting a writers group?
That's I think Scott, myself, and I don't remember the exact items that we talked about or what we did, but John McLevine and Scott and myself were talking about the big delay between NeCon and any other large convention. In the old days, there was a convention called Anthicon that was held in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And that was a very big, I say very big, it was a big convention. I think it was at the Holiday Inn at the Howard Johnson's. They switched back and forth. And they got a couple hundred people going, and it was a little bit pricey, a little bit expensive, but it was a thing to go to. It was something to do. It was early, probably late fall, early winter, usually October, first week of October, second week of October, that it was held. And they got some pretty good authors to go. Brian Keene was one of them, Jonathan Maybury. There's a bunch of people that went there, and it became a lot of fun. The problem with Anthicon is after 4 years, it got so big that the founders just couldn't make enough money to keep it going. There weren't enough people going, and they had to stop it. So when Anthicon stopped, it left a hole in a lot of our souls. What do? We have to wait till the spring, till some of these conventions start back up again. And Scott and John MacLeod and myself said, why don't we start one, and we'll keep it local, but we'll keep it very small. And the reason we wanted to keep it small is so we could make it affordable. We charge, I want to say $20 a person, $25 a person, $20 a person to go. It's cheap. It's one day. And we offer not classes, but panels, a lot of informative type things, training, all things to do with horror writing and genre writing. And we get some pretty good people to come. And we've had Jim Moore, Christopher Golden, Bracken MacLeod, Douglas Wynn. Those are just a few names of some of the people that we've had to put on these presentations, to put on these classes. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. The first year, I think we lost quite a bit of money, but it was still, it was a lot of fun. We had to rent the hall and whatever else that we had to do. And second year, we broke even. But one of the things we've also done is we created an award called the NoCon Award that recognizes a male and a female who contributes to the horror industry. It is pretty much unrecognized. It doesn't get the attention that they should get. And with the NoCon Awards, we give those out. And Matt Bechtel, who I thought was here, but maybe he's not, was also one of the recipients. And he's the one that puts together Nikon and does such a fantastic job at that. But I don't think he's ever been recognized for it. So NoCon fits that niche. It helps people that really can't afford to go to conventions to be able to afford to go. And if you can't pay, we don't charge. If you say, hey, look, I'm broke, we let you in. And it gives us a little bit of a reprieve, not a reprieve, but it gives us a little something to look forward to after some of the big conventions in the summer. And we have the awards.
What's one big dream convention that you'd love to be a part of?
Oh gosh. I love Nikon. I mean, out of all the conventions that I go to, and that includes StokerCon, I think Nikon is still my favorite. It will probably always be my favorite. I enjoy the camaraderie, the presentations, everything about Nikon is just great. As far as not going to any or wanting to go to one that I've never gone to, I don't know if I can answer that. I'm not a big convention guy if it's not in New England.
I know one that I've always wanted to go to is Comic-Con. I mean, that's the big one. I lived in New York, in San Diego for a while, and we could never get down there to do it. But and of course, it's become this big, huge thing. Is that something that big? Is there something like that you'd like to be a part of?
I wouldn't mind going to a Comic-Con in New York or San Diego. We have a smaller one here in New Hampshire, in Manchester, and Scott and New England Horror Writers usually have a booth set up there. And that's kind of fun. I mean, it's nowhere near as big as the one in Boston, which I have been to. But it's still fun. I mean, I sell a lot of books at all those Comic-Cons that I've gone to and events. No, I don't know. I guess I'm just a New England guy. I like, the things we have here. I don't feel a need to go anywhere.
Yeah, fair enough. When we first started the store, one of the places when we were starting to look for local authors was John MacLeod's Haverhill House convention down in at the library down there.
Oh, that's fantastic! Yeah, that's a book.
Yeah, it was a great time. We met a lot of new people. We met him. We got his books, a few other books. So our local author table was pretty much full of horror and thriller books when we first started. That's how we got our start.
Chris has done a great job with that, and this year, well, it was going to be this year, but the next one will be run by Melissa Sherlin. who was doing a fantastic job up until the pandemic. When we had to cancel it, and she'll be back at the new one. And she's got a good group of people working with her. And Chris is always in the background. So if a problem comes up or we need advice, Melissa's there. She'll talk to him, and we'll get it going again. It'll be just as good, if not better.
Yeah, we were definitely looking forward to doing that, and that's partly why we did this, is because we wanted to get you and your fellow horror writers out there. So a lot of your collections and your short stories and even your novel have been nominated, if not won, a lot of local awards. Would you like to talk about those?
Well, the big one, of course, is the Bram Stoker Award. The Seeds of Nightmare was nominated, but it never made it past the nomination process. It came close. I can't remember how close it came, but I want to say 1 or 2 votes away from, making the final ballot, but it didn't make it. But the Moore House did. And it was such a thrill to be nominated for Bram Stoker Award. And I did go to the award ceremonies. It was held in Michigan. And I went to Michigan and met all these people that I just absolutely, adored, horror authors, from the 70s and 80s growing up, like Kathy Koger. I got to meet her. McCammon, Robert McCammon, I got to meet him and talk to him. Oh God, there's so many more. Jonathan Jansen, there were so many people there, authors that I'm just in awe of, that I got a chance to talk to and to meet. And I met a lot of fans there, people that knew me, knew my book and knew me, but I'd never met before. And it was a lot of fun talking to them. In fact, what I would do, I would often leave all the presentations or whatever and go outside and smoke a cigar. And I'd meet John Skip out there. And John Skip and I would wind up talking, and all these other people would show up, and we'd have a fun time out there, just sitting there shooting the breeze and, talking, gossiping, if nothing else, about the industry and the people. And then when the actual awards came, and my name wasn't announced, it really, I was very happy for Gwendolyn, who did win. But there's a sinking feeling, you just go, oh my God, I worked so hard. I wanted this so bad, and you didn't get it. And I John McLeod went through the same thing with Hannaware. You get over it. It's fun. It's nice. It's not the end of the world. But you still would love to have this, be able to say, I won a Bram Stoker Award.
Right. Yeah, John McLeod, he'll be with Christopher Golden to end our series next Saturday. We have his book, Hannaware. That's a fantastic book itself.
But you read Hannaware and not the Moore House.
He was one of the first ones. Well, that's, like I said, that's how we got to go to the Haverhill House, to the library there, is because we had his book. I don't remember how we got in touch with him, but somehow we found out about him and got the book. But yes, I will definitely read the Moore House. But if it's as scary as my son says it is, I'm gonna make sure it's during the summertime when there's a lot of light.
There you go.
So where you met all these, my genre of choice really is kind of fantasy adventures, the dragons and the magic and things like that. But I do enjoy some horror, but it's still kind of limited. Peter Straub, the usual ones, Stephen King, and that those there. So much for you. One thing that I realized opening the store and expanding is there is a huge, if not nationally, but definitely locally, horror writers group. You mentioned though that you got to meet some of your favorites in Michigan. Who is your biggest influences in your writing?
Oh, geez. There's a lot of them. The first one would be Steve Vernon. You probably never heard of him. He's a horror writer out of Canada. And Steve did a lot of what you call fantasy, but he did a lot of horror. But he always had humor in his books. Now, if you read any of mine, there's very few that show any trace of humor, in the stories of the plots. But his imagination just really got to me. I was just so spellbound, whenever he came out with a new book, and I loved reading them. But, the guy that really got me to write would be Tom Piccirilli. I don't know if you know Tom. He's a big crime writer, but he was also a big horror writer. And he had, I want to say 4 or 5 books out with Leisure during their heyday. And Leisure was a huge horror writer. In fact, and Leisure used to deliver 2 books to their subscribers every month. So every month, and people would wait. They'd die for those 2 books to come in. And Tom was big during those days, and he had some books. But he joined that Horror World group that I was talking about earlier. And that's how I got to know him. And I talked to Tom online as well as offline. And he would always encourage me. He was super encouraging. And as I mentioned, he would read some of the stories that I wrote. And then, one day, I'll never forget it. One day I wrote this real small thing about my wife who was a born-again Christian. And so I can't exactly remember the story now, but it was only a couple paragraphs long about the heavens opening and a God came down. And he got online and he said, "Tony, you are now a writer." And when he said that, I'm like, okay, I can do this. And that's, when I joined the Writers Club and started to learn the mechanics. So Piccirilli was a huge, huge influence. And it was funny because I used to review for Horror World. I did a lot of reviews for them, as well as Cemetery Dance and some overseas magazines. Forgot where I was going with this. He would send me, Tom Piccirilli, after we got to be friends and I reviewed a few of his books, he would start sending me some books before they were published, before they were even arcs. He would send me these type pages of what he was working on. And I was, I'm just this little guy sitting the other end of the computer, and there's this huge famous guy, at least in my eyes, sending me these things to read and for me to talk about. So that also gave me a huge boost. Of somebody that well known, that powerful, if you want to use that kind of word, saying stuff to me,
Yep.
Maybe I do belong. Maybe I am part of this thing, and it made me feel good.
You've been to the store a couple times and we've chatted, and without going too much into the personal thing, but you just mentioned that your wife is a born again Christian. Was that any influence on the specific topic of the Morehouse?
No, it's funny. People have heard this story. They're probably going to sigh because I'm going to tell it again. But Bracken MacLeod, who's a good friend of mine, was having an event at a Barnes and Noble. I want to say Framingham, but I could have the city wrong. And I went to it, and I got there early, like I normally do for all events. And I decided to go to eat somewhere. And when I walked in, I saw Jim Moore sitting there, eating. And I had signed up for a class on how to write better fiction that Jim Moore and Christopher Golden were putting on. And when I saw Jim, he invited me over. He said, "Hey, Tony, come on, sit down, eat," and so I had lunch with him. And while we were eating, the subject of the class came up. And he said, "So tell me, Tony, what's your novel going to be about? What are you going to submit?" And I was stunned because I thought the class was on short stories. I had never written a novel or come close to it. I've just written short stories then. And he said, and I said, "What are you talking about, a novel?" He goes, "Yeah, it's a novel class. You're going to be submitting the first chapter of your novel." And I said, "Oh, yeah, Jim, I got nothing. This class is in 3 weeks. I thought it was a short story class." He goes, "No." And I said, "I don't know what to do." He said, and he looked at me, straight in the eye like Jim does. He said, "Tony, what have you always wanted to write about?" And I thought about it. I said, "Well, a haunted house. I always wanted to write about a haunted house." He said, "That's what your novel's going to be about." I said, "Okay." And I went to the event, and when I got home that night, the minute I got in, I started the first chapter of the Morehouse, and had it done in 3 weeks and submitted it.
Speaking of haunted houses, have you ever been to Stephen King's house?
No, I haven't.
Well, this kind of also leads me to my next question, though, is you must have heard that he's going to be turning his house into some sort of a writer's retreat or some exclusive thing. Is that something you'd be
I'd
hoping to
love
do,
to.
or
I'd love to, but I'm retired and I'm not, independently wealthy. So it
amen
depends.
to retirement?
I don't know what it would cost to go to one of those things. I don't know how it's set up. If he's going to make it, available for free, if it's a scholarship type thing, or it's a lottery. I don't know. But yeah, sure. Who wouldn't? I'd love to go there.
Have you ever been to a writer's retreat?
Oh yeah, yeah. Christopher Golden, his name comes up a lot, doesn't it? Chris has a writers retreat that he has in Stowe, Vermont, every year at the Sound of Music. The names escapes me now, but the family that did the Sound of Music,
Von Trapp. Yep.
Von Trapp family. He has a weekend there. It's I believe a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday retreat.
Wow.
And I've gone to that once the whole time, and then once I crashed it for a night. But I had an absolute ball, and in fact, the new novel that's going to come out through Havel, I can never say Havel without screwing it up, but yeah. Havel House is I actually read a portion of that for the first time at that second writers retreat I crashed, and the response I got, the feedback was so positive. It really it gave me a push to keep it going.
It must be hard. One thing that we've heard from other authors is everybody's done retreats in the past, and it was kind of tough this year because they couldn't do it, and hoping that they could do, some in the future. We have one author who goes over to England every year, but of course she had to put that on hold for everything. So it's, so you also mentioned that you took a writer's class. Have you, since you started writing, have you taken other classes? Do you constantly,
No, I haven't. I'm not a big fan of going to a lot of these things. I've gone to one or two free ones that somebody would have, coming through. Usually somebody that wrote a book would have a class and try to convince you to purchase their books. And I've gone to a few of those. But the one with Chris and Jim I went to because I obviously respect both their output tremendously, and I just wanted to see, what kind of advice they would give, and really what a real class setting would be like. And it was over 4 months, over 4 weeks, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 weeks, and it was a fun time. I mean, I won't say I learned a lot, but what it did is it forced me to do some things that I hadn't really thought about doing before. And that could be something as simple as getting all the senses involved in a story or plot, little things that actually contribute quite a bit to the story that I just hadn't bothered with before.
One thing that I had heard of last year was the NaNoWriMo. Have you ever participated in that?
No, I don't.
I attempted it. I did like 30 words once. I just got inspired one day because everybody was talking about it. So I'm like, oh, I got an idea. So I wrote it down on my phone. But that seems like a lot of time and a big task.
It's a lot of time, and it's not the way I write. I heard your previous guest talking about how he writes, and I'm the opposite. It might take me all day to write one page because I go over that page over and over again. I correct when I write. I might get 4 pages done, but I do not go beyond that 1 or 4 pages until I'm absolutely sure I like the structure of the paragraph I've written or the sentences. And I'll go over them and over them again and again, too much, but I do it. And I don't outline. If you're going to ask that, I'm a pantser. So it's even more important that I get things right when I write them, rather than saying, I'm going to go to the end and I'm going to fix everything. If I did that, I'd be fixing the whole frigging novel. It doesn't work that way. I like to build. I like to increase the tension. I don't know where it's going, so I'm interested in where it's going. I want to see where it is. If I already know where it's going or what's going to happen, all I'm doing is putting in little clues. And I just don't like doing that. It just takes the fun out of it for me.
Our last guest yesterday, Greg Bastianelli, movies were a big horror movies, B movies were a big influence in his writing. Is that any influence on your writing?
No, I never. I've obviously watched movies, but I wasn't a big movie fan. I mean, people could tell you who directed what and what starred, what actor starred in a movie. I would go to movies and I'd see them, and it's funny because I never really started to get interested in horror movies. And I'm going to bring his name up again until Chris Golden started inviting me with, Melissa and a few other people said, hey, let's go to the movies. And this happened, I think, about 2-3 years ago. And I started going to the movies with them. And I started seeing all these movies I never would have seen, like all the Marvel movies. I'd never seen one of them. And then Chris and Scott and, John and Jim, and they'd say, oh, come on. So I'd go, and this whole world opened up to me. I mean, I just absolutely loved all these things that I saw. And I had a lot of fun. But when it came to horror movies that I saw with them, they really know their stuff. And I don't. So I might sit there and watch a movie and I'm jumping in my seat. I mean, I just, Scott sits next to me and I'm like jumping, and he'd laugh, because I fall for all that stuff. These guys have seen it so much, they look at it with a critical eye. And I'm like, oh, I just either like the movie or I don't. I just don't dissect it like these guys do.
So what book has made you jump the most? I believe you bought the book The Living Dead, a new novel by George Romero. It's one that we have in the store. It's sort of the way George Romero really wanted the Living Dead movie to be. Daniel Krauss finished the manuscript and finished the book. Did that make you jump? What was a book that made you just really cringe and jump out of your seat as you're reading?
We'll start with that one since you brought up The Living Dead, that I did buy at a Free Thinkers Corner. It was very exciting. It was very thrilling. It never made me jump, but it had me at the edge of my seat, which is when it comes to being entertained, you can't ask for anything less. I mean, that's, you got to make people want to read it. And you got to, if you're writing a horror book or a thriller, you want them there, you want those big, deep scratch marks, in the arms of the chairs. So, and I read most of this outdoors by the fire pit. And I was just absolutely thrilled with the book. It was nothing like I expected it to be. I'm not a big zombie fan, but I really love this book. And there were so many different characters. Martin, and who finished it? Krauss. What was his name?
Daniel Krauss. Yep. Daniel Krauss.
Krauss. They did a fantastic job. They really did. It reminds me, a little bit of, if you talk about influences, it reminds me a little bit of King. When King first started out, he would end his chapters on a cliffhanger. People would be like, oh my God. Then he'd go to the next chapter and be something completely different. So you had to wait, and that tension was still there and it was built up. The Living Dead did that a lot, which I just love. I absolutely love that. And if you read the Morehouse, you talk about influences, that's how I set up the Morehouse. Each chapter ends on a cliffhanger. So the tension's just there and there's nowhere to go. So when you read the next chapter, it's usually coming off another cliffhanger. So I just kept the tension going and going and going. And the Living Dead did that. They did a very good job of that. As far as a book that really got me scared, probably Summer of Night by Dan Simons. That one got to me. The Exorcist, the book The Exorcist got to me. A lot of King's early stuff, Salem's Lot. I mean, those things really frightened me.
I was just going to say, my wife, Salem's Lot, for her, that just kind of really, not turned her off to King, but was brilliant. But that kind of.
Yep. That was the one that I think that was the first one of his I read. Then I went back to Carrie after I read Salem's Lot, and I was just a fan for life. I can't read every single thing he comes out with because I don't have the time. And
right.
But what I have read, I like his earlier stuff better. I just think it's more focused, more direct. And this newer stuff just seems to go on a little bit too long. And if you look at the Dark Tower series, there are some books in that series that are absolutely amazing, and there were some that were just like, you could wait for it to end because it was just so not boring, but it just kept going on and on and on and didn't get anywhere. So yeah, early King is my favorite.
Have you ever started a book that somebody else was reading, a friend of yours or an associate of yours that was reading, they finished it first and they kind of not spoiled the ending knowing that you were reading it, but kind of made a comment that just says, you know what, maybe I'm not going to finish this. Case in point, you brought up the Dark Tower series. I was about 2 books behind from a friend of mine at my previous job, and he just said, you know what, don't bother with the last book.
Oh, you're kidding.
So I never read it. I never finished it.
How can you not read them? I enjoyed the last book.
But for what he was disappointed in the ending. So I mean, I should have finished reading it because I may have had a different thing. But just that kind of comment, because we were both back and forth, catch up. And has that ever happened to you, or do you always finish a book when you start?
I always finish a book, but what does happen is on Facebook, somebody will write about a book, and if you go in as different groups, and especially horror groups, they'll all talk about, how great this book was or how bad this book was. And occasionally I'll be reading one of the books they're talking about, and someone will come on and say, oh, 10 Little Indians, or The Only Good Indian. The Only Good Indian. And I'm reading it, and they're saying, oh, it really sucks. I can't stand the writing and the whole bit. And I'm there like, ah, and I hurry up and I get off it. I don't read the rest of it. But yeah, it can happen. It can happen.
So we have a Scott Goatsword and Roger Stevie. They made a couple of comments that horror movies with Tony are hilarious, and Tony is a funny guy.
Okay.
So on the movie thing, though, have you ever thought about, you said that all the Avenger movies, the superhero movies, have opened your eyes to a whole new world and genre of movies. Have you ever thought of combining your horror writing and with superheroes?
No, that's not my forte. I don't think I could do it justice. I mean, I won't say it'll never happen, but I'm more of a traditional horror writer. I enjoy the older styles of horror, and not that you can't do that with superheroes. Eric Nunnally does it very well, as a matter of fact, in his books. But I don't think I could do it justice.
We're going to have Eric Nunnally. He just signed on for, I think, next Wednesday. So we're going to have him. So we'll be able to talk about his books. So I know that you just, listening to you, seeing you on Facebook and stuff, and some of your comments that you like to have a scotch and a cigar every once in a while.
Me? Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'm confusing with somebody else. Well, I was gonna say, gotcha. Yeah. And a cigar, and you built a beautiful fire pit. How do you get started writing? Do you sit back with a scotch and a smoke and then let the ideas kind of flow, or do you do that to relax if you've gotten to a sticking point?
Every one of the short stories that I've had published, I never knew what I was going to write about until I sat down at the computer. I would maybe a theme or a vague idea would come to me, like on the way to work. As I drove over a bridge, maybe I saw a woman walking by, and I'd say, ooh, I could probably make something out of that. And then I'd go home at night, sit down, and say, okay, without, the way I write is I usually start with atmosphere. I'll write a paragraph, 2 paragraphs about the surroundings. So if it was, take this woman, for instance, I'd write, oh, the bridge looked like this. There were lots of trees around. You could smell the dough in the air from the bakery that was next door, and that mingled with the sense of the Chinese restaurant down the street. She tripped on a crack. So I'd get the atmosphere going. Once I got that atmosphere going, I would start working on character. And once I had the character pretty much figured out, I'd start the story. Now, and once I start the story, I would wind up creating, the plot while I was doing it. And that might sound really bass-ackwards, or, how can you even do that? But I've done that ever since I started. Some of my favorite stories, the best stories, or people that compliment me the most, It's just me sitting down in writing in Blue Stars, the story Blue Stars, which I get probably the most compliments. Well, I shouldn't say the most, but a lot of compliments from. I just sat down at a computer one day and started writing about a woman in a diner. And some guy, I said, oh, some guy's going to walk in. And then that's how I built the whole story up. And it comes to you while you're writing. And like I said, I'll only write.
You just
What's that?
got a question from Kimley Sanders. It looks like you have a lot of CDs and music behind you on your shelves. Do you have a favorite album or music that you like to listen to while writing?
I never listen to music while writing, ever. It has to be completely silent. I lock the door, I turn the lights off, it's dark, no music at all. And it's the only way I can concentrate. If I have music playing, I can't concentrate on the story. But I do love music.
I just got this vision in my head when you say you turn the lights off and no music of one of those 1800s, mid 19th century desks with the.
Okay, you've stopped on me. Yep, you've disappeared. Well, hopefully you'll come back. If everybody else is still watching and listening, I'll explain a little bit about the CDs behind me. I've been collecting music ever since I was a kid, a teenager, and I used to have thousands and thousands of albums, vinyl albums. And then when CDs came out, I wound up buying CDs and getting rid of the albums. And no, I don't feel the need to go back to get albums, and nor do I miss them. Well, in and out. My favorite music, if you're going to ask me what kind of music I like, you're going to laugh if you don't know me, but it's Neil Young. I love Neil Young. I love all his incantations, starting from, again, the late 60s, when I was a teenager, going until now. I still follow him, I still listen to him, but I love all kinds of music. I enjoy rock and roll, folk, even some of the dance music that everybody gets excited about. I loved progressive music, ELP, the newest one I found, Porcupine Tree, that John McLeod turned me on to. I really enjoyed. You back?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but now
okay.
Now you're back.
There we go. Like I told you, I got one of the cheapest computers.
You're gone again.
Well, can you hear me though?
On and off.
All right.
Now you're back.
There we go. Now, here we go. Try this again. I'm going to try and get the other computer up and running as while we're doing this. But yeah, so we had our guest yesterday. He likes to listen to, well, I was saying that I pictured the Englishman with the ascot and the dinner jacket sitting in front of with the candlelight and
the quill and the
quill. Yeah. Yeah, and writing. Is that so your preference of writing, is there a particular time of day that you like writing? Like we've had some who are first thing in the morning writers, some that are just kind of whenever something comes up, they sit down and write.
Yeah, this is when I was working, I would do it whenever I had a chance. I mean, that included at work, on my lunch breaks and regular breaks that I would take. Since I retired, what I've normally done is I get up fairly early in the morning. I'll eat breakfast and then I'll start writing a little bit. I'll write for maybe an hour or two, depending if I'm on a roll. Then I'll stop. I'll go downstairs. I'll work on some woodworking projects, or I'll, maybe watch something on TV or Netflix. Then I go back to the writing. So over a course of a day, going back and forth, I'll probably write for a good 4 to 5 hours. But the rest of the time is spent doing other projects or other things. I have spent all day writing. I just don't enjoy that. I don't find it as fruitful as I'd like it to be. And that's mainly because of the way I do write, going back to correct the things that I have written. I think we've lost him again, everybody. Oh, there he is. But there's no sound.
Okay.
Oh,
I got
there.
the other computer up and running. This thing's a piece of crap. Sorry. Anyways, so you said you're a pantser. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. You say you're a pantser. You don't do the outline. Do you keep a notepad or a DVR or something with you to be able to take notes when you?
I keep it with me, but I very seldom use it. And I've taken notes. Sometimes I'll think about what I've already written, and I'll think, oh man, I should have put this in, or I should have fixed that, or I'll change this, and I'll write it in a notebook. Then I'll put the notebook away, and I'll forget all about it. I never wind up going back to it. So I it's nice to have in case I ever really need it, but I haven't really needed it yet.
Do you have you ever when you're done you have the manuscript done? Do you ever use beta readers? And has your wife ever read your work?
I'll start with that one. No, she refuses to read my work, and if I actually said that in the introduction of one of my books, that she'll never read any of the stuff I write. She is a born again Christian. She doesn't believe in this. She thinks it's all evil. She probably thinks I'm evil, but hey, that's the way it is. I'm not going to change. And it doesn't bother me that she doesn't read it. It's not a big deal to me. The other part, what was the first part of the question?
When your manuscript is done, do you use beta readers or?
Yeah, I don't. The writing group probably reads 10, maybe 20% of my novel that I bring to them, and they'll critique it, and they'll go over things, and that helps quite a bit. But what I did in the past is I actually sent the novel to an editor when I was done. When I finished my own second or third draft, I would send it to an editor. I paid for it, send it out and have them take a look at it. And then I got a hold of John, or John got a hold of me. I can't remember. But when I gave it to him, all his changes were completely different than what the editor that I paid all this money for to change, what he wanted. And he crossed out a lot of stuff that they did. He added his own questions, his own comments. So when it came to the new book, when I finished it, I didn't bother going to the editors or anyone else. I just gave it right to John. I said, John, can I just send this to you and you can send it to your editors? I said, it'll save me a ton of money. And I have a feeling that money's kind of going to be wasted anyways, because you have your own approach and your own ideas on how a book should be read. So no, there's no real beta readers that I have. It just goes right to John.
Is that how you got your books published through Haverhill House?
The two short story books are published through Crossroad Press. John and I have talked about it. He's not really big into publishing short story collections. He's done it. Matt's has done very well. But he just in general, he'll do it. If I said, hey, John, I've got this collection, he said he'd do Blue Stars. But I know it's not something he likes to do. So I went through Crossroads again for that one. And I talked to Crossroads. The nice thing about Crossroad Press is when I first talked to him about the Seeds of Nightmares, they told me, if you ever have another collection, please let us know. So I had that commitment from them anyways. So when I went back to them, I said, hey, were you serious about a second collection? They said, oh, yes, we want it. So I gave it to them. And it all worked out.
Do you ever think about going the self-publishing route?
No, I haven't. No, I'm old school, and there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. It's right now, it's not for me. I'd rather have I'll probably get hell for this, but the stamp of legitimacy on it, that it came from a real publisher, that it was edited, and that it's many eyes have gone through it before it's landed on the bookshelves.
So before my computer went wonky a little while ago, there I had asked about your scotch and your cigar. If you use that as a sort of break if you get writer's block, and we do have somebody asking, Dwayne Caulfield asking, do you get writer's block, and if so, what do you do to try to get out of it?
Yeah, all those things that I do a lot of woodworking. I do a lot of projects, a lot of work around the house. I go to the fire pit. But it's interesting. I haven't written I actually have. I've got 2 short stories that were published this year. One with Midnight at the Pentagram, which is a collection of stories about the devil, and I've got a story in that collection, and I've got a story in One of Us. And after those 2 stories, it's a tribute to Frank Arrington, and I don't have a copy of that to show you. But that's an anthology that also just came out recently. But I haven't written anything since then, so I won't say it's a writer's block. It's just that I just didn't feel like I wanted to write another short story. But one day I was out at the fire pit, and I had a scotch and I had a cigar, and I sat back and I was looking up. It was I want to say around 5, 6 o'clock, so the sun was almost gone, and I was up looking through the trees. And the story just kind of came to me, which usually doesn't happen, but it did this time. And as I was looking at those trees, as the sky was turning black, I just started to see things. And again, I sit in front of a computer and I just start writing. But this story literally presented itself to me. The only thing it didn't present itself was the ending. So, and I can take care of that. So I started last month, I should say, writing this story. And I sent it to my writers group without an ending. And they loved what they read. And I've got to finish it now, but it's the first short story I've written probably in about 2 or 3 months. And it's a lot different than what I normally write. It's very, very atmospheric. Not a lot of action takes place. So it's meant to give you the creeps without grossing you out, or I want to raise your hair without having physical reasons to do it.
You sure that was a cigar and scotch that? It
wasn't LSD. No, those acid days are long gone.
Have you ever thought about taking some of your short stories and turning them into a novel, expanding on them?
No, I really haven't. No, I don't think so. I could. No. I have to go back and look, but they're all pretty self-contained. No.
Or even taking it and doing a novel based on the short story. So like the short story is done, but expanding on maybe one of the characters in the story.
I've done the opposite. As I mentioned, Midnight in the Pentagram and and Blue Stars. I've actually taken characters in the Moore House and made short stories from those characters.
Mick Upstill says, I think Steel could become a novel.
Yeah, it probably could. It's funny. I didn't get a lot of great feedback from Steel when it was first published in Triplicity. I think people liked it, but it didn't really, knock anybody's doors off. When it came out in Blue Stars and other tales, I got a lot more feedback on it. But I kind of, after Triplicity, I just kind of let it go. I didn't. There's still ownership, but it was like, okay, that's done now. I've already done it. It's in the past, and I think I'm just going to let it rest. But it was nice to hear some of the good comments I got from Steel.
So some of the ones that didn't get a very big reception on, would you be willing to go back and maybe retool them a little bit more, knowing what you know now and all the experience you have? Go back and retool maybe some of the earlier ones, put them in a new compilation of short stories 2.0 or something?
No, I don't think so. I'm pretty happy with the stories that I've written as they are. You know, if you ask me which collection I like the best, it's my first collection with some of the first stories I ever wrote. I like the best, only because it seems like the person I was back then, his imagination was so much different than what I have now. I was so fresh and so new. Any idea that would come to me, I could write a story about. If I'd sit down at the computer, like I said, with a blank page, and I'd think, a flood, it's a tsunami. I'd start writing a story about a tsunami. People at a beach, and all of a sudden this big wave comes. Or an Alabama Christmas. I'm amazed sometimes at what I was thinking back then. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago when I wrote a lot of these stories. And when I reread them, I'm just amazed. Sometimes I think, wow, that was me.
Yesterday's guest mentioned that when he first started writing, he started pen and paper, and then he got the personal computer, or regular typewriter, I should say, typewriter, then the word processor that does a couple lines at a time on a little screen, home computer, PC, laptop, that sort of progression, and having to retype everything. How did you start? Did you start pen and paper? Did you start right away with like a typewriter or computer?
I started with a computer. I've only been writing for about 10 to 15 years. 13, we'll just cut it down the middle. I've only been writing for 13 years. I came to it way, way late. And part of that was because I worked so hard in business. I just didn't have a lot of time. I didn't even think about writing. I would work, oh my God, when I first started, I would work 7 days a week, 10, 12-hour days. And when I came to the last company I worked for over 30 years, almost 35 years. But I had to build that back up from nothing. So it took an awful lot of my time and energy. And it wasn't until about 13 years ago when I met that woman, that my friend, that said, hey, the library's got a writers club. You might want to join. It wasn't until then I really decided to spend the time and devote to it.
You mentioned not the library woman, but an example of a woman you see in the street and you start writing about her. Have you ever used any of your personal experiences and or other acquaintances or friends as characters, kind of put their personalities or something?
I can tell you never read the Morehouse. Because it is full of people that I know, and I use their names. Jim Moore. The Morehouse is literally named after Jim Moore. And that's as a tribute and a thank you for pushing me into writing the novel instead of a short story. And there's other ones in there too. MacLeod is mentioned. There's many people that I know. Gam is in there. Everyone that I put in there, I asked if I used their full name, if I could do it. And I told them what their character was like and what was going on. So I got their permission via email. They said, oh yeah, go ahead. I'd love for you to do it. In the new book, Do Not Weep for Me, coming out on Haverhill House Press, Matt Bechtel, who's going to be, who's here, but is also going to be one of your guests, has a prominent role in the new book. And I asked him, I said, hey, I hope you don't mind that I did this. And he said, no, I absolutely love it. He goes, just make sure I die really badly. So you'll get your wish.
We have another author coming up, Alan Leverone.
I know.
Yeah. I worked with him. My former life as an air traffic controller. He still does it, but he does a lot of writing on the side too. He did write one called Final Vector, where he used the facility that we worked at as his setting, and some of the characters, not by name, but by personality and actions and stuff. I could pick out who
you knew.
So I knew who. So how do you work that disclaimer at the beginning of the book then? All characters and places and people in this are fictitious and have no,
And that's in there, but I also say, I've used a lot of names of friends, and they've all, agreed to do it, and they've had a good time with it. And I really want to thank them for allowing me to do it. So, I mean, if you look at the Moore house, I mean, Jim Moore is not a demon, that lives in hell that winds up, trying to kill people. And, Gam isn't a young drug user with blonde hair that, as thin as a rail, that got killed, as a horrible way. But, they're just, it's just fun. And, I've got some people that absolutely love the fact that I use these names. I got some that said, oh, it took me out of the story. And, John McLeod, my publisher, he didn't like it at first. And he wanted me to change all of it. And I said, no, John, I this is part of the fun. I want to use their names, and they're all really happy to let me do it. So we did. And I think it actually made it more enjoyable in the long run for people that do know these people, and read it. If you look at the reviews, people always mention it. So,
so when it came to the cover art for the Moore House or even any of your books, how much of the decision was yours? How much was it with the editors or the publishers?
It's always the author's decision. The publisher will make suggestions, and if the author's not a real dick, he'll go with something. Sometimes we won't keep him waiting forever for that perfect cover. When it came to the Seeds of Nightmares, I told the publisher I wanted a real 80s look. I wanted that monster look, and I wanted the colors to be gold, red, and brown. And I said, what I specifically want is two hands coming up out of a hole in the ground, which would signify the monster that was in the first story of the book. And he came up with 4 or 5 things that just, it didn't look right. I mean, he followed everything I said, but it didn't look right. Then finally he says, Tony, I got it. You got to see this. And he sent it to me, and it was perfect. It was exactly what I had in mind. So we went with that. When it came to Blue Stars, I just said, David, all I want is I want a dark cover, but I want a woman looking out over a sky, a blue sky, a blue sky with white stars. You can't do blue stars, and I mean, second or third try, he came up with it, and I was really satisfied with it. But on the Moore House, which everybody loved the cover,
yep,
John would send me all these pictures of haunted houses, and he asked me to go look at haunted houses and stuff, and I did, and I just kept thinking, that is so cliche. Every haunted house book has a cover of a haunted house. So I said to him, I said, John, I've got an idea. How about if we put a cross in a Bible on the cover, and that's it? He said, Tony, you're not going to believe this, but the artist just came back with this, and he sent me the picture, and it was a cross and a Bible right on the picture. And, it was just, I don't know, maybe I astral projected my idea to the guy, or I picked it up from him. But it was perfect. It was beautiful. And I said, yes. And just to comment on the cover again, if you ever looked at the cover, the hardcover of the Moore House, it's got like a leathery feel to it. It is so beautiful. It costs extra to do that. And John says, Tony, you want to do this cover? I said, well, what's it like? And he showed it to me, and I just fell in love with it right away. And people that do buy the hardcover all have remarked about how great that cover is. I've never seen anything like it. And I don't know how he even found out about it, but they do make it, and it does cost more. And it also eliminates the need for a dust jacket if you get the hardcover. But it's so great. I could sit there and just feel that cover all night. It's just a lot of fun. It's nice.
One of the things that I have not a hard time getting across to authors who bring their books in for us to look at, but one thing that I really stress is the cover art, because especially when it comes to books, you do initially judge a book by its cover.
Yep.
You see something interesting, then you pick it up, you read the back, and then you kind of maybe thumb through it. Is it worth the expense to really is, I don't want to say worth the expense, because obviously it is worth the expense if you're going to have a really good cover done, but is that a part of the expense that should be most the most put into?
It's the second most important part of the book, aside from the text. It's the cover, and the cover is what's going to draw people in. And I tell John, I tell whoever that's doing the covers, do it right. Get it, get a good one. Get some people that really know what they're doing. There's some great people out there. When you're talking about costs, you can spend anywhere from a couple $100 to $600 for a cover. It depends on who you go to, what their level of competence is, and how much they've done it. And I've had some people anthologies for the eulogy series, like Dina Warner, who charged a lot of money, but the cover was absolutely brilliant. And there's some, any artist, any cover that comes with screaming red letters for a horror book, demand your money back or don't pay. I think that is the worst thing any horror author can do, is use a cover with those screaming red letters, the death house, it's all in dripping blood red. It just looks so corny, and it looks so bad. It looks so fake. There's no imagination in it. And you talk about Greg's book from yesterday, Snowball. That cover catches more people's eye than you can imagine. I mean, the minute I walked into a bookstore and saw that Watermark Bookstore, I can't remember what it was, where he had an event.
Oh, Water Street. Yep.
Water Street. That was it just caught my eye right away, in a good way. Not that's so garish looking. So yeah, a cover, man, it's worth it. Pay to have it done. Have a good guy do it. A good woman do it. There's a lot of good women artists out there. Lynn Hanson, for one. I mean, there's some really good horror artists cover artists out there.
There's one book that we got. It's called The Art of Dying, and it's a thriller horror, and the cover is just fantastic. And if you listening, just take a quick Google search of The Art of Dying book. It's all these like manacles and chains, and there's like a little bit of blood dripping, and you can really get a visual as to what the book is potentially about. Matt, you mentioned Matt Bechtel there. He commented, "Are you sure Jim Moore isn't a demon?"
I'm positive. Yeah, Jim, let me talk about Jim for a minute. Jim has been my literary hero and my favorite author for a long time now. And back in the 80s, or 90s, when he came out with the trilogy, the Serenity Falls trilogy, I just fell in love with those books. And I just couldn't believe how good this man was at writing horror. And then I'd read books like Cherry Hill, which just absolutely floored me. And I just love this man I love his writing so much. And then I never thought I'd meet him. He's like one of those guys that are just always up there, and you look up to him and you say, oh man, he's not even real. He's just this great guy. And then I did meet him, and I met him at one of the Nikons, and it was maybe, I don't know, 2 a.m. sometime. I'm sorry, that wasn't the first time. The first time I saw him is he was walking down a road, and I was sitting on a rock, and I just waved to him, and he waved back. And he said, "Come here." And I said, "I'm Tony Tremblay." He said, "Jim Moore." And he hugged me. He just hugged me, grabbed me. And I was like, I didn't know he did that, and I got squished, and I loved it. And he was great. And he took off. He was walking away. And then the next time I saw him later that night, it was about 2:00 in the morning in the hotel lobby. And he spent an hour talking to me, an hour. I mean, here's this nobody fan, just somebody that bought his books and enjoyed them. He spent an hour talking to me, and my love for the man really blossomed then. So over the years, we would communicate, we would talk, we'd meet at Nikons. Then he moved up to New England. He moved up to Massachusetts. He was my next door neighbor, and it's been amazing, absolutely amazing. That I've count him as one of my really great friends now, good friends. best friends. And it's so wild, the trip we're all on, I guess. Where you pick up a book one day in a bookstore, and then 12 years later, he's one of your best friends.
You had mentioned astral projection when it came, your cover art there.
Yep.
Do you believe in like astral projection, any of that sort of new age spirituality, reincarnation, aliens? We know we had you had mentioned a post about an article about aliens. Yeah, wasn't going to go there, but surprisingly though, when you posted about possible aliens and meeting them and stuff, I got a message from one of our customers asking about a book by the person who made the
Israeli,
scientist there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny that there we've got that astral projection thing going. I got this request for the book, and you're talking about it on your Facebook.
I don't know what to believe and what not to believe. I do believe that there's psychic abilities out there, that people do have them. They do pick up on things. They may know what's going to happen before it happens. They may know something that they're not supposed to know, that they just picked up. As far as you talk about God or religion, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't discount it, but I certainly don't, sit there and say, oh, there's a God up there, and
I wasn't really kind of going there. It was more just but have you ever worked any of that, or do you have ever thought about working some sort of psychic element?
My new book, not Do Not Weep for Me, but the one I'm working on now. I don't have a title for. Well, the title is The Tavern. That may change, but that's all about a young girl from Korea that has psychic ability, and it's terrible what happens. Some really bad things happen. But yeah, I do. I am using that currently in the third novel.
Do you have a timeline as to when that hit
No,
the shelves?
no, because I'm waiting for John to move on. Do Not Weep for Me, and he's talking about somewhere around this June, maybe sooner, maybe later, maybe Nikon. So I don't know when it comes out. So there's no rush for me to have a follow-up to this right away. So I can take my time on it. My guess is I'll be done with this third book probably by June.
Well, let's hope by then we can at least start having in-person events again, so we can have you to the store, so you can have it do an event there. But so to the Morehouse, have you ever thought of, I know it's in ebook format through the company that shall not be named, but have you ever thought of audiobook for the Morehouse?
It's an audiobook.
It is?
Yeah.
Do you have it done? I was going to check before we got on tonight, but is it available through Libro FM?
I don't know. John MacLeod's in charge of all that audiobook stuff. He had it done. He had it. He contracted the reader. He went through whatever company is that does it, and it's out there. That's all I know.
That's one of the that is the audiobook company that partners with, for those that don't know, Libro.fm is the company that we partner with. A lot of bookstores partner with. Sales through them come portion come back to bookstores. That's how that's why we partner with them.
Talk to John.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could do that, because we would definitely promote it. So who if you could have the Morehouse, this is a fun question I like to ask. If you could have the Morehouse narrated by any famous celebrity, be it a voiceover celebrity that does audiobooks, if you know any, or TV movie star, who would you want to narrate the book?
Boy, I don't know. John picked a woman to do it for the Morehouse, and I think a woman would be appropriate if it was a famous person that wound up doing it also. Geez, I don't know. There's a lot of sexy voices out there. I'm very partial to Uma Thurman because I just love the way she looks. I think she's sexy as hell. I think she's got a very sexy voice. So she's probably never done it in her life, but I would love to see Uma Thurman do it just to say that Uma Thurman did it.
Would you be willing to do it yourself if they wanted to do it again?
No, I'm not. I don't think I have a voice for it, to be honest with you.
So would you like to see it on like TV? Could it work itself into a TV series, or do you think it'd be like a standalone movie?
Oh, it would be a movie. We got interest from a company that was in partnership with Sony Pictures. They contacted me, and I freaked out. I said, "Oh my God, no! They want to make a movie out of the Morehouse." And I called Christopher Golden, and I said, "Chris, what do I do?" And he put me in charge with his manager, not his agent, but his manager. And I said, "Look, you got to help me. I have no idea what I'm doing here." And he took over from there. It never really got off the ground. I mean, they talked a little bit, and the last thing I heard was, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, but they came back and they said, "We don't like the way the Morehouse ends." And I said to the manager, "Well, that doesn't make sense because they're always changing books, movies, from the endings and books and whatnot." But that's how it was. So, if somebody else in the future comes back and says, we'll make a movie, that's great. I'd be more than happy to talk to them again.
All right, so kind of the same question as the audiobook. Any famous actors that you'd like to portray the characters if it ever became a movie?
Father MacLeod is a huge character in the Morehouse, and in the follow-up, Do Not Weep for Me. I would love Bracken MacLeod to actually play himself or play his namesake in these movies, because the description I used of Father MacLeod is very close to what Bracken looks like. And Bracken has done some acting for Izzy Lee. I don't know how much, but he's done some. I just think he would be a natural in that part. And I'm biased because, in a way it's kind of based on Bracken. But yeah, I'd like to see Bracken do that. As far as the pawn shop owner, I've never really thought about it, but it would have to be some kind of short, skinny guy who's got penetrating eyes, that can really command your attention by not even doing anything, by just standing there. Your eyes go to him. So I don't know, maybe Ryan Reynolds.
What about the Mad Max movies? That real skinny character that flies that airplane thing.
Oh, I don't know.
I can't think of his name. Anyways, Stephen King did his Night Shift, the short story movies. Would you like to turn one of your short story collections into?
I would, like yeah. I think there are some of them that would probably be nightmares, and you'd have to use CGI to get them done. And there's others like Blue Stars where it's all emotion and acting and feel. So yeah, I mean, I would love to have any of these movies, any of these stories, turned into a movies or a series. I think every writer that writes short stories thinks, oh man, they could make a whole series about my stories, and it'd be great if Netflix called up and said, hey, we want to make the Seeds of Nightmares into a series. And that'd be great. And I think they could, and I think it would be a lot of fun if they did.
Well, we got a few minutes left. One more call out to everybody who has questions. If you have a question or comment for Tony, either on Zoom or Facebook Live, it'd be a good time to get it in now. So what are you reading now?
One of the nice things about working with John MacLeod in Haverhill House is he'll send me books that have been submitted to him. And he does that so I can give him my opinion, what I think about the book. And he's done that a few times now. And he's got one sent to me by somebody that we both know that I respect as an author. and I'm reading that. And I don't normally read 2 books at a time, but for some reason I am now. I'm also reading The Bank by Bentley Little, who is also a huge influence, a favorite of mine from the 80s, going way back. I'm reading that. I just started that. And then after that, I've got an unreleased book by Gene O'Neill and Gord Rollo that I'm going to be reading.
There's one book that I definitely recommend to everybody, especially in the horror genre. It's out of my comfort zone, but I read it just because, well, I listened to it on audiobook, but it sounded interesting. It's called Tender as the Flesh, an Argentinian female writer. I can't remember her name, but very disturbing. It brings up a lot of moral issues. For me, anyways, that's one thing that really kept me interested in it. But for any of you who are looking for a real sort of, it's kind of like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle,
Yeah.
but involving more human than animal. This does have issues with animals as well, but that's something to really check into. It made me very uncomfortable to read, but
Is
I
it
stuck with
organ
it.
harvesting?
What is it?
Organ harvesting?
More on the line of cannibalism, but it's the way that it's gone about.
Okay.
And just sort of the meat packing, or the meat industry as a whole as well, worldwide. But do you have sort of a guilty pleasure read, like something that I never thought to read was Mexican Gothic? It's more of a romance, supernatural romance, something that I really wouldn't read, but it was recommended, so I read it and I really enjoyed it. Do you have a guilty pleasure, like a Danielle Steele or something that you got kind of hidden away in those amongst those CDs?
I wouldn't call it a guilty pleasure, but Jeff Strand, who's a horror author, also writes a lot of comedy, and he writes some young adult books. I just love his young adult books. You talk about guilty pleasure. Bad Day for Voodoo is a fantastic book, but it was written for teenagers, and the horror in that is all comedic. It's a lot of fun. So it's not something I would normally read, but I just really enjoy it. And he's got a couple other books that I've read that are YA oriented that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, we have a lot of good. There are a lot of good young adult books out there now. They're kind of right on the edge of young adults. Adult. A boy and his dog at the end of the world. That's one that I read recently. Is fantastic. Anything from Alana Mugden, the Dragon Speaker, Dragon War Saga. The Dragon Speaker is the first book. They're great, but. So we got Roger Seavy's asking, have you read any Charlie Parker novels by John Connolly?
Many years ago, so long ago, Roger, I don't recall. I probably should read more because I do remember enjoying it, but I just kind of drifted away from that. I used to read Ludlum, a lot of those thriller authors from MacDonald from way back. But I got away from it. I probably should get back to it. And thank you for bringing that up, because I'll take another look at those.
And we have Scott Goodsword. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Are you working on a new anthology?
Oh, geez, yeah. This is really exciting. Actually, Scott's part of the anthology, but Scott, myself, and Charles Rutledge, and John McElveen, because Havel House is publishing, is working on a anthology about horror trains. We've got some fantastic authors that have already submitted. It's a closed submission. What we did is we picked, each of us picked 3 authors that we really wanted to work with. We really enjoyed their work, and set out invitations for them to be part of the anthology. And they came back and said, yes, they would. I don't want to give their names out now until table of contents is released, but there's some really big authors in here, really good authors, and the stories are fantastic. They're just really great. It's all about trains from, or I say train, they could be subways, but they're all locomotive related. And the time period could be anywhere from the 1800s to the present.
Have you ever thought of taking something like that, like say the Polar Express, just talking about trains, and making that into a horror movie, some sort of kids, holiday book or a fun book like that, and turning it into something and twisting it around?
I haven't. Uh, I haven't. And other people have done stuff like that, and they've done it quite well, and they're very successful at it. I don't know if I could write for kids. The closest I've come to is Steel, the novella I talked about that's in Blue Stars. It was not written for young adults, but it was written with young adults in mind, meaning there's no sex, or the sex is alluded to. It's never shown on the page. And the swearing is like almost nil. So I just don't think I'd do well. I want to swear. I want to write sex. And Do Not Weep for me, there's a lot of sex in that book where there's hardly any in the Morehouse. It's just, Do Not Weep for me is so different from the Morehouse. It's the same, but it's so different. It's hard to explain, but once you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Michelle Lane says the Polar Express is a horror movie. I'm going to have to agree with her on that.
There you go.
So in the final minutes here, I'd like to just thank everybody. Greg Bastianelli is watching on Facebook Live. He said a great job tonight, Tony. Just want to thank everybody for joining us. The Morehouse and Blue Stars, Triplicity, and one of the other short stories. What's the other short story?
The Seeds of Nightmares.
I believe we had that one in the store, but definitely Triplicity. We have a couple copies of that. We have the plenty of Morehouse and Blue Stars. They're all available through us. They're also available through bookshop.org, of course, direct from Tony as well. We wish you the best of luck with the upcoming one, and hopefully we'll have you back in the store to.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Chris, and Free Thinkers Corner for having me. I really did enjoy it.
Good. You're welcome. Thank you. And again, thanks to everybody who showed up tonight, and everybody have a good night.
Good night now. Thanks, everybody.